Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth is commercially and critically the most successful Yakuza game in the franchise, and initial fan reaction seems to place this game alongside Yakuza 0 as the best game in the series. So, do I agree? Well, I cannot really say. You see, whilst I am not much of a Yakuza expert, I would definitely consider myself a connoisseur of JRPGs. I tried the first Yakuza on the PS2 and 0 on the PS4, but bounced off both games. I was not a huge fan of the main character or the real-time fighting combat. So when Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon came out, it very much piqued my interest. New protagonist, new turn-based JRPG combat, a brand new story arc that does not require you to know anything about the other Yakuza games to enjoy it. And oh boy did I enjoy this game. Yakuza 7 has some of the best characters, localization, performances and side content of any JRPG I have played. And that's very much the lens I'm looking through when it comes to Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. It might be the best Yakuza game, but is it actually a good JRPG? Can it stand toe to toe with some of my personal favourite JRPGs? Well, looking at the strongest and weakest moments of each of these 6 criteria, I'm going to help you decide whether or not this game should be your next 60+ hour JRPG commitment. Looking at the world, the strongest part is Hawaii and the weakest part is Kamurocho. You see, Yakuza games do not use sprawling open worlds, but instead highly realistic, hyper-condensed versions of real-world locations with these very small maps that have a wealth of activity down each street. Kamurocho, based on the real-world Tokyo district of Kabukicho, is the home of the very first Yakuza games, and it appears in most games since. Its inclusion here is a bit of an afterthought though. It's the worst part of the game's world, not because it's bad, but because nothing necessary to the main game really happens here. It feels like its inclusion is there to appease long-time fans, and it bogs down the new stories the game is trying to tell. You see, what made Yakuza Like a Dragon so appealing for a new player like me was that 95% of the game's story was new and only 5% relied on having prior knowledge of previous games. Meanwhile, Infinite Wealth, I would say, is about 1/3 of the game relies on having knowledge of the previous games to fully enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, this 1/3 of the game is not bad, and they do a good job of trying to catch up to speed, but these sections focus on ancient history rather than emerging events in the game's narrative, kind of bogging down the story and butchering the pacing in the meantime. Hawaii, though, is a brand new location for the series and is the first time the series has left Japan, and it's probably the series' largest map and is exceptionally detailed. We have sun-bleached beaches, fire dancers, and Anaconda Mall, which is a facsimile of real-world Ala Moana Mall. And the whole colour palette and vibe and sudden rainstorms are such a brilliant contrast to the Yokohama region you start the game in. The fact that the Japanese have such a close affinity with Hawaii as a retirement and holiday destination means that they've done this location justice. The Hawaii region in Pokemon X and Y is my favourite Pokemon region, and this might be my favourite region in any Yakuza game as well. The best thing about this game's combat are all the improvements to the admittedly limited Yakuza Like a Dragon combat system, and the worst thing is the difficulty balance. So Yakuza Like a Dragon was the studio's first JRPG, and it was a fairly successful one. Though as the game went on, cracks definitely started to show when it came to the combat. Thankfully, Infinite Wealth improves every aspect of the combat. So the combat relies on a lot of positioning. You could knock foes into one another, do area of effect attacks that target a wide radius or a straight line, and you could, under very specific circumstances, grab nearby objects to deal extra damage. The problem with how this all worked is that it was very limited information that you were given as a player. So much of it appeared random or at the very least kind of unreliable, and the worst part was having another foe get in your way and interrupting your attack, dealing you damage and ending your turn prematurely in a way that was really hard to predict or mitigate. Infinite Wealth has taken these criticisms on board. Now the player gets a lot more feedback on who their attacks will hit, Other enemies cannot interrupt your attack anymore, and now every character gets to batter foes with bits of scenery. Other problems have been improved include resistances and weaknesses and status effects having a much greater impact, and the inclusion of foes being able to guard and counterattack, meaning you have to choose specific grab commands to break their guard. The combat is still not especially deep, but the dynamic camera, hilarious and unorthodox moves, and the Paper Mario style timing your button presses do make the combat chaotic and entertaining. The worst part though is the level scaling. All enemies have a level that is visible. I like it, but my god is it strict. Say you have a foe that is level 25. If say your party is level 30, you will kill them in just 1 or 2 hits. Likewise though, if you're level 20 going against a level 25, you yourself will die in 1 or 2 hits. This means combat is very dependent on stats rather than strategies, so it's very rare that you can get that sense of beating a boss when you're underleveled, because it's almost impossible. Equally, if you're finding a boss too hard, it's less a case of coming up with a new strategy or applying some new jobs, and more a case of leveling up a bit until you can just steamroll the boss. The best thing about progression is the inherent job skills you can customize, and the worst part of it is the lack of diversity between the jobs. So Infinite Wealth has a job system that is unlocked around 15 hours or so into the game, but unlike most games where you might play as a paladin or a knight or a mage or a cleric, here you play as a tennis player, a detective, a chef, a maid, a pop idol. Unlike in Yakuza Like a Dragon, which had very specific skills that could be inherited by each class, Infinite Wealth makes it a much smarter decision to let you pick which skills you inherit, rather than it being forced upon you. So you could play as a linebacker that has some actions inherited from their previous jobs as a samurai or a pyro dancer, and each job is unlocked through these elaborate cutscenes that awaken something in your character. They are very extra, very stupid, very entertaining, very Yakuza. Unfortunately though, as the game goes on, you will come to realise that these jobs are not as differentiated as you first thought. Sure, they have their own stats and weapons that you can use, but their progression is very limited. You see, as you level up, your jobs will unlock new attacks and new skills, but you'll never really unlock any passive abilities, and there's no way to inherit any stats from one job to another. So all you ever really unlock are attacks and the occasional healing spell. So it is like, oh wow, my tennis player just unlocked an area of effect water spell. That's cool, except my Desperado, my Cleaner, my Host, my Hostess, my Aquanaut already have a move that's basically the same as that. Still, each job has 2 unique super powerful cutscene moves though, which are a joy to watch and thankfully can be skipped during long battles. Have a look at some of them now.
One, 2, 3. You shit me!
Fight on! Give him hooray! Hooray!
Right, I'm going to put all my cards down on the table here. The best thing about Infinite Wealth and the previous JRPG Yakuza game is the characters. They're amazing. The best thing about the characters in this game is the bingo bond, and the performances, and the localization, and the bonus food cutscenes. Okay, I'm struggling to pick just one favourite thing about the characters, and I have no negatives. So, we've all played JRPGs where certain characters just never get used, or their story arc was completed 20 hours ago and now they're just kind of hanging around in the background for no real reason. Well, these games use a Persona style tactic of being able to make bonds with your party members, spending extra time with them to unlock additional side stories and flesh out their character. And you do this in a ton of ways, including giving souvenirs whilst exploring Hawaii, playing minigames with them, and my favourite new addition to the game is Bond Bingo, which is triggered by visiting specific locations on the map that are triggered a small, fully voiced side conversation that lets you learn new things about your party members, such as their worst habits, their favourite food, how they are with money, their favourite pizza topping, the last time they talked to their parents, and each of these mini revelations are recorded on this cute little bingo board, where you get bonuses for completing rows and columns. Another favourite new addition are these food sketches you unlock by ordering specific sequences of food at different restaurants. There are dozens of them, and they're all very sweet and endearing, and allow old party members such as Namba, who admittedly has little to do in this main game, to really shine as they wax lyrical about wanting to buy a kids meal in a fast food restaurant for the free toy, but is unsure if it's socially acceptable to do such a thing. We love you, Namba. Never change.
What? Stuck wondering if it's weird for a grown-ass man to order a kid's meal? Don't feel bad, Nan-chan. I accept you.
Just because I want a kid's meal doesn't mean you have to treat me like a kid.
And the localization and performances of these characters are top quality too, with characters using idioms, modern phrases and colloquialisms just absolutely effortlessly. What's a great JRPG without a great story? Unfortunately, unlike the general consensus on this game, I found the overall story to be a bit rocky, with my favourite being the opening few hours and the worst bits being all of the Kiryu sections. So Infinite Wealth opens up with a series of story sequences that catch you up from 2020's Yakuza Like a Dragon to a real world 4 years later being 2024's Infinite Wealth. The idea of the developers rushing through 4 years worth of key events does not sound super appealing to me, but this game does everything so well, with my favourite section being going on a date with a previous party member named Psycho whilst prepping for the date with other party members Namba and Adachi. Namba wants you to play it up front and honest on your first date, whilst Adachi wants you to play it slick and smooth and hard to get. This sort of story could easily be tiresome or borderline offensive in most writers' hands, but here it is hilarious and heartwarming and surprisingly feminist for a Japanese media. Oh, and this intro sequence is such a delight, and it might be one of my top 5 opening cinematics in video game history. The worst part of the story is the Kiryu sections. I touched on this a little bit earlier in the video. Kiryu is the main character of the first 6 numbered Yakuza games, as well as a prequel game and many side games, and this game very much treats it as his swan song. Despite the fact that Kiryu had his swan song in Yakuza 6, and then again in 2023's Gaiden game, but from what I understand, Infinite Wealth is a much more satisfying send-off for Kiryu than either of those 2 games. And I love the respect and time this game gives to hardcore audiences, and the developers do make an effort to have this not bog down the main story and try and have that as little as possible by having most of these sections be assigned to side content, but they still kind of rear their heads in the main game every now and again. And put simply, Ichiban Kasuga is my favourite protagonist in any video game, and Hawaii is a fantastic new location. So spending entire chapters of this game with a less charismatic Kiryu in the previously explored Yokohama cannot really compete. Okay, how is this for side content? You get previous Yakuza staples such as poker, mahjong, a dating game with super creepy real world vibes, the god tier karaoke, exams you can do, old Sega arcade games you can play in their entirety, including Super Bass Fishing, Virtua Fighter 3 and my personal favourite Spike Out, a beat 'em up that was the developer's first game and a game that I played for the very first time about 6 months ago when on holiday in Japan. But that's not it. We also have new side content such as Uber Eats themed Crazy Taxi homage, a Pokemon Snap game, an incredibly elaborate Animal Crossing style island management game that admittedly I did not spend much time on, and my favourite, a Pokemon minigame complete with 3-on-3 battles, 5 elemental types, over 100 monsters to collect, an Elite Four to challenge called the Discreet Four, levelling up with protein powder, and hilarious bizarre, mature rated Dragon Quest style pun names such as Dysentery, a diss rapper who talks shit to you, and a parking attendant called Misdemeanor Wiener. Love it. There are also traditional side quests too, but this leads to my one negative, being that sometimes these side quests can disappear randomly, or the next part of the quest might not really trigger, or might trigger much later than you want it to, such as the leader of the Discreet Four, which for hours just didn't appear for me when it was supposed to, and I looked online and other people had the exact same problem. Still, with this being a modern AAA game, and these being the only glitches I spotted in my entire experience, I would say it's pretty forgivable stuff. And there we have it. Infinite Wealth is a great JRPG by all accounts. It's not as easy to recommend to newcomers as Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I would definitely recommend playing that game before trying this one, but you cannot go wrong with either game. Oh, and one last thing I wanted to mention is Infinite Wealth's coat game. Look at these coats. They are beautiful. Bye.